Does interfacing confuse you? Woven, non-woven, foam, Decovil. What's the difference and when do you use them? Today I'll break it down simply so that you know what to use on your next bag. Hi, I'm Deb from the Bag Makers Society and I help bag makers go from hobbyists to confident creators. Let's take the stress out of interfacing and stabilisers. So one of the questions that I've been asked most recently is, how do I know what interfacings or stabilisers to use and when? So I thought I'd make this video kind of explaining what I use and when I use it. And I will be honest, a lot of it has just been trial and error. I'm not going to go through all of the interfacings and stabilisers on the market because let's face it, this video would be hours long. But I'm going to go through my tried and tested interfacings and stabilisers that I reach for every single day. So let's talk first of all about the difference between interfacings and stabilisers. Interfacings are what give a fabric strength and durability, and stabilisers are what are going to give your bag structure and form. Now you can get interfacings in both fusible and sew-in varieties. I'm going to be primarily talking about fusible because as bag makers that is pretty much the variety that we use, but you can get them in a sew-in form. Now the interfacings that we can get come as woven and non-woven. So this is a woven fusible interfacing and this is a non-woven fusible interfacing. And I'm going to talk about the differences between the two and the times when I would use the different ones. So woven interfacing is primarily the interfacing of my choice. So obviously there's a few different brands on the market. Here in the UK we would usually get either Viazaline, which is G700, Pellon SF101. This is a generic brand that I have on my website. This is like a medium weight fusible woven interfacing. I will use this on both the exterior of my bag and the interior of my bag. The reason that I do this is woven interfacing acts like the fabric. It is woven in the same way that cotton is woven. It drapes very much like a cotton fabric or a woven fabric will drape. It doesn't crease very much, so when you birth your bag you don't have lots of creases to have to deal with, and I just feel it gives a really nice finish to your fabric. Now non-woven fabric is perfect for things like card slots and zipper facings because it has a paper-like structure, so it will crease and it will hold that crease. So perfect for things like card slots where you want to form a crease and you want it to hold. Not so great when you birth a bag and those creases form and you can't get them out. Hence why I don't tend to use it in the exteriors or linings of my bags. These do get fused in slightly different ways. Woven fabric I will fuse at 170 degrees on my heat press. I fuse my woven fabric at 170 degrees with no steam. I tend to hold my heat press for around about 10 seconds and then move on to the next piece of fabric. As I'm going to insert a little bit of footage of me pressing my fabric to my interfacing, you will see that I work in sections and I tend to block fuse my fabric. So I will work out how much I need to cut out all of my pieces for whatever bag I'm making, and then I will block fuse that fabric to my interfacing so that I can cut out all of my pieces together. So rather than cut out my fabric separately and then my interfacing separately and fuse those pieces together, I will cut out the fabric, cut out the interfacing, block fuse it all together and then cut out my pieces. So woven fabric, I fuse at 170 degrees for around about 10 seconds, and then I will check to make sure it's stuck, and then if I need to go back over it again, I will. Non-woven interfacing, I will fuse at around about 150 for around about 8 to 10 seconds. It doesn't take quite as long to fuse as what woven fabric, woven interfacing takes. And again, I do exactly the same. I'll work out how much I need to cut out, block fuse it, and then double check to make sure that it's fused and go back over it if I need to. Non-woven interfacing is best adhered with steam. So I will spray my fabric with a little bit of water or best press before I fuse my interfacing in place, and that makes the interfacing stick much better in place. So I just want to show you a couple of little squares that I have fused some interfacing to. So these are what I've done up as little samples, and I have written on the back the interfacing that I have fused to it, the temperature that I have fused it at, how long I have fused it for, and that it's been pressed with no steam because this is a woven interfacing. And then hopefully you can see this is a little bit of a dark fabric, so it might not show up so well. So this is a non-woven interfacing, so I've written on that it's non-woven interfacing. It's been fused at 150 degrees for 8 to 10 seconds, and I've used steam. So these I can keep to one side, and I have a reference of the interfacing that I have. You can also maybe make a note of where you've purchased your interfacing from, so you can go back to repurchase at a later date. But it's a handy reference to have. You can keep it next to your iron or with your interfacing, wherever you store your interfacing. So it's a handy reference when you're fusing your interfacing, that you know exactly how long it's going to take. And I just want to use these two samples just to show you why I use woven interfacing for my linings and my exteriors as opposed to non-woven, for the reasons that it creases. Obviously, if I crease this up for purposes of if I'm pulling it through the bag and birthing it, obviously you can see, I'm just going to pop my iron on, you can see that it's creased a little bit, but it hasn't creased really badly. Now I can use my hands, and the warmth of my hands will press back out those creases, and it isn't too bad. Now this non-woven interfacing, if I crease this up, you can see how much this has creased, and those creases really stay, and even when pressed you can probably see they still stay in. And obviously when a bag is made into a 3D object, you can't then get an iron on it and press it, where obviously if I press this one over, I can iron out all of those creases nice and flat again. The woven fabric will press flat again and iron out all of those creases. So that is the reason that I like to use woven interfacing for all of the fabric that's really going to be on show. So now that we've talked about interfacings a little bit, I'm going to move on to stabilizers. Now again, there are so many different stabilizers on the market, and the stabilizers that you are going to want to use is really dependent on the bag that you're making, and I would really be led by the pattern that you are choosing to make. As you get more experienced, you might want to experiment with different types of stabilizers and deviate from the pattern, but I would definitely suggest if you are a beginner bag maker, to use the stabilisers that the pattern designer is recommending. So first two stabilisers I'm going to talk about are Fusible Fleece and Sew-In Foam. Now you might be asking me why I'm not talking about Fusible Foam. I always use Sew-In Foam because I find it wrinkles less. Now again, it's personal preference. If you want to use Fusible Foam, by all means use Fusible Foam, but I always use Sew-In Foam, and I'm going to show you a little trick a little bit further on in the video as to how I get my Sew-In Foam to stay in place and out of my seam allowances. But this is Fusible Fleece. Now you can see it's fairly slim, so this just gives a little bit of poofiness. It isn't too thick, it isn't too rigid, and it will just give a bag a little bit of structure. So this is a bag that I've made with Fusible Fleece. As you can see, it's quite squidgy, it's quite soft, but it isn't a bag that needs a lot of structure. It just needs a little bit of softness to it and a little bit of stability. So the Fusible Fleece is perfect for this bag. So when you apply in Fusible Fleece, you would apply Fusible Fleece with a little bit of steam, because Fusible Fleece is a non-woven stabiliser. I always apply fleece after I have put on my interfacing. So I would put interfacing on first and then put Fusible Fleece on afterwards. I would always put fleece out of my seam allowances. So just to show you, so I have this little sample here that I have already prepared, and as you can see, the fleece is out of my seam allowances and I have interfacing on already, and then the fleece is smaller and out of my seam allowances. Now this is applied with steam, and I have written on the temperature, so 150 degrees. It's been applied for around about 10 seconds. I've applied it with steam and it's non-woven. So again, I can keep this to one side so I can easily refer back to it as and when I need to. And again, I could always write on where I get it from, so I can easily refer back to when I need to replenish my stock. And then we have Sew-In Foam. Now, as you can see, this is much thicker. Foam is really good if you are quilting and want to add a little bit of depth to your quilting. It's also good for bags that you want to have a little bit more structure to and need to kind of stay more upright and, like I say, have a little bit more structure. So this bag here was made with foam, and as you can see, this bag stays perfectly upright on its own, and while it is squidgy, it doesn't compress as easily as the bag that was made just with Fusible Fleece. So it does have a little bit more rigidity, is that the word? I don't know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean. This bag, the cotton has woven interfacing applied first and then has the foam applied as a stabiliser to it. A top tip for keeping your Sew-In Foam out of your seam allowances, and I'm going to insert a little video of me applying this here, is to sandwich your foam between interfacing. So I would interface my cotton first and then cut out my foam piece, reducing it by my seam allowance, and then sandwich it with a piece of woven interfacing over the top of the foam and adhere the interfacing to the edges so that the edges are basically sealed with the interfacing, and this will keep the foam in place. So hopefully you can see this, and again, I've written on the back exactly how I've done it, and this basically just stops the foam from shifting in place. And I much prefer doing my foam this way than basting it in place and then trimming it back, because it still means that I I have foam in my seam allowance, and it just adds bulk to that seam, and it means when the seams are turned through, I just have extra in that seam, and it just doesn't look as nice. Where this way, that foam isn't in the seam at all, and it turns through much more nicely, and it just gives me a much nicer finish. And if you are sewing on a domestic machine, it makes sewing through the seams much easier because you're not sewing through all that extra bulk and extra foam. Two more stabilisers to talk about is Decovil Light and Decovil Heavy. Decovil Light is a leather-like stabiliser. This is what it looks like. It's used primarily to give a bag a much more upright structure to it. This bag here has got Decovil Light in it, so it will give a much more upright structure to it, but it doesn't add that sort of squidginess to it that the foam gives. It is a much more leather-like feel to it. It isn't very dense. It is very thin in its feel. It is a non-woven stabiliser, so it needs to be applied with steam as well. And I also have another little sample here that I've already prepared. So again, I would have my, if I was applying it to cotton, I would have my interfacing on. I would apply Decovil Light out of my seam allowances, and I have how I've applied it with the temperature, the time, and the fact that I've applied it with steam. Decovil Light can be applied to vinyl, but just make sure that you are protecting your vinyl. So use a heat cloth, Teflon sheet, something like that. If you need to, drop your temperature down a little bit, because you can always increase it if you find that it isn't sticking. Always leave your pieces to cool completely before you then go ahead and start to construct your bag. What you want to be doing is leaving your glue to completely recool, reset, before you then going ahead and completing any of your steps to make up your bag. And you don't want those pieces reshifting. You want that glue to be completely set again. So that's Decovil Light. Decovil Heavy is the same sort of feel, but thicker. It's kind of not quite double the thickness of Decovil Light, but not far off. And Decovil Heavy is used primarily for the bases of bags. So again, I have another sampler here made up, and I have my instructions written on the back for easy reference. Again, I'm going to show you on the bottom of this bag, because I have Decovil Heavy in the bottom of this bag, and I have quilted over the bottom of the Decovil Heavy, because that's something that I love to do. I love to have a quilting effect on the bases of my bags. I find that it helps to keep the Decovil Heavy in place as well. It helps to really help the structure of a bag base. So yeah, Decovil Heavy, primarily used in bag bases. It can be quite often be used in the structure of purses, that sort of thing. But like I say, be led by the pattern designer's instructions and what their suggestions are for what you can use. I do have a little bit of a cheat sheet, for want of a better word, that I've put together, which there's a link in the description box down below that you can go to. You can download it. You can go back and rewatch this video and make any notes, scribble them down on that cheat sheet, and you can refer back to it anytime. I have done a little bit of research as to the equivalents of brands in different countries. Obviously, I'm here in the UK, but I know that there's different brands in different areas whether it's Viazoline or Pellon or those sorts of things. So try to do a little bit of research for you and give alternatives for what might be available in different areas. So hope this little overview of different interfacings, different stabilizers, how to use them and when to apply them has been helpful. If I can give you one top tip, it would be to make yourself a little sampler up. Whenever you buy a new type of interfacing, cut yourself a little square out and have a little practice of putting them onto a fabric. Make a little note of what temperature you have used, how long you have fused for, and obviously if you've used steam or not used steam, and also make a note of where you've purchased it from, because it'll save you having to go back through all of your emails to find out that information. If you've got a favourite type of interfacing or stabiliser, please do share it down in the comments box down below. Or if you have got a top tip that I haven't gone through that you want to share, again, please do leave it in the comments box down below. Don't forget to go and download your cheat sheet for easy reference in future. And if you found this video helpful, please do give it a like. And until next time, I will see you on a video soon. Bye.